Welcome back to the program. Joining me is our regular Friday panel, Parnell Palmer-McGuinness and Ben Oquist. Great to see you both. Ben, what have you made of the local reaction to that tragedy in Gaza? 7 aid workers killed. It's really dominated discussion this week in Australia, but far wider than that as well.
Yeah, I really think it's one of the defining moments in this war, in particular in how it's perceived around the rest of the world, including Australia. And Israel has really lost a lot of sympathy, a lot of public support, a lot of diplomatic support, which was rightly there after those horrific October 7 Hamas attacks. But over time, that has waned because it doesn't excuse the loss of thousands and thousands of innocent Palestinian lives that have been killed or murdered in some people's minds. And now, as public attention had started to wane in Australia, just because the length of the war had gone on, has really refocused. And the Prime Minister and the government, who had tried to, in a sense, not take sides in this war, have really been forced to by public reaction and the horror of an Australian aid worker being killed. And you've seen much stronger statements by the Prime Minister, criticism of the Israeli Prime Minister, and saying really it's not good enough, those kind of fog of war excuses that are offered up by the Israel government. And I think we've seen a real change. And I think it's going to bring into wider relief calls for investigations and independent investigations, not just into this tragedy and the killing of the Australian aid worker, but the crimes essentially being committed by the killing of thousands of innocent Palestinians' lives. And so we're going to have a wider discussion about independent investigation in there. And as you know, the family has called for a war crimes investigation.
Parnell, what's been your take on the local reaction? I think Ben's right to say the government and the Prime Minister has toughened his language. It's much stronger in the wake of this tragic incident in Gaza with the Australian 44-year-old from Melbourne, Zomi Franken, being killed. The language and the message is much firmer.
Yeah, this has been a real sort of bringing everything to a point. I think people in Australia have been becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the war, as around the world, as the death toll mounts. And this has put a very local face on it, because this is obviously somebody who was over there from Australia trying to do good, and that can really bring home the futility and horror of war to people in a particular country. So I think this is a focused sentiment. I mean, you will note that the Jewish community has also come out and said that this needs to be accounted for, because the other thing that's happening at this time is the Jewish community is looking at what's happening in Gaza and starting to wonder about what can bring this war to an end with Netanyahu in charge. So there's an increased focus on what the government in Israel is doing and a much less forgiving stance on it, because Netanyahu has not articulated what the end game is other than getting rid of Hamas entirely. And as we know, the more action is taken to get rid of Hamas, the more Hamas sympathisers seem to be created in Gaza and, sadly, around the world.